Hi, welcome everyone. This is Dave Gambaccini, Principal with Excel Capital Partners and President of the New England CCIM Chapter. I'd like to welcome you all today for a free webinar. You are muted, your video is off, and we don't seem to have our chat function the way we thought, so we're going to address that in a minute. But our webinar today is a good opportunity for us to look at what we can be doing right now, right? We've got a lot going on with this COVID-19 pandemic, and we wanted to try to help everyone get an opportunity to learn what we could be doing. And so we communicated with Blaine and we set this up. So we're going to kick this off. A turn isolation into opportunity webinar. As I said, I am trying to get my screen to work. There we go. Hey, there's that guy. So I'm with Excel Capital Partners in Bedford, New Hampshire. We have today our guest speaker, Blaine Strickland, a CCIM. He's a coach, a speaker, and a best-selling author of Thrive and his recently released Adapt, and he's going to be able to talk a little bit about those. And also helping today will be Jeremy Cyrier, president and founder of Mansard and CCIM instructor, board member of the New England CCIM Chapter. And we're going to go through, we hope to be about a half hour or so webinar, and then our chat function isn't working, but we're going to try to get this thing to work so you guys can ask questions. And we're going to try to open it up. What I might do is unmute the microphones at the end for just live questions. That might work. So there is what we thought was going to have a chat function, and it didn't quite work. So I would have asked for any questions, but I didn't want to unmute everyone and get us all jumbled right from the start. So without further ado, I will drop my screen and I will pick up Blaine. You are able to share your screen, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. Jeremy, let me check in with you. First, can you hear me okay, Jeremy?
I got you, Blaine. Yes.
And it appears to me that the recording function is working. And so then the final question is, can you see my screen?
Yes, and the fish.
Technology. I live in an aquarium. Okay, guys, welcome aboard. I see many people that I recognize and know as friends in the chat box or the participant list, I mean. So I'm glad to have you. Welcome aboard. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to try to think about what I've started calling the Great Isolation. Remember how we had the Great Recession, and then we've kind of enjoyed the Great Recovery, and now we're in the Great Isolation. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about how we can respond to the situation that we're in. So I wanted to think through three primary questions with you today. The first is, how can I improve my value proposition? I think this is a valid question because as I wander the country and talk to top performing brokers, I frequently hear what I consider to be weak value propositions. They're simply what we get is, I'm a commercial real estate broker, or I'm a consultant. And so I want to talk about spending a little time while you're in this isolation period to think about being more specific and therefore more powerful as you interact with clients and prospects. Secondly, I want to talk about how you should be engaging those clients and prospects now. It's been a very, very interesting period. Some people, of course, are starting to think about coming back, and maybe that will change the sort of cadence of the situation that we're in. But a lot of us have opportunities to engage, and I want to talk about some ideas I have for you there. And then finally, I want to talk about how could we be even more powerful when we come back? How could we truly find the silver lining in this situation and be even more powerful? And the way I've phrased that question is, how can I increase my market penetration when the market returns? Which means when we're able to get back to full speed, how can I capture my share or even more than my share? How can I play above my weight class? Those are the three questions I want to try to talk about. I'll do that in about 30 minutes and we'll have some time to talk at the end. It is being recorded, so there will be an archive for you. There are also copies of these slides that can be available to you. Dave and Jeremy will help you with that at the end. Okay, so as I answer or work with you on these three questions, what I've done is try to segment my answers into three categories. You can see that the three-sided shape, the triangle, is simple. In other words, I think you might find yourself making a quick note and go, wow, I could do that. The four-sided figure, the The square is going to take you a little bit longer. You're going to have to think about that a little bit more. You may have to invoke some other people, but I would call that sort of the moderate response. Some of us, the way our lives work, we are actually getting a little time to think. And then the five-sided, or the five-sided star is a more advanced answer, and it will take some work. It's a little more complicated. It will require you to work at it. You may have to work at it in several segments. But I think if you can find time during this great isolation away from the daycare, as Dave says, there's a real opportunity here for you to make a powerful move forward. What some people have been telling me is that the silver lining is already upon them because they're getting things done that they knew they should do, but have never been able to make the time. In other words, as Stephen Covey would say, we're always in quadrant 1, which is urgent and important. Now we have an opportunity to be in a time frame where there's nothing really urgent today. How can we get those quadrant 2 activities, meaning not urgent, but still important? How can we get those done? And that the five-sided star indicates some of those ideas. Here's an opportunity for you to live in quadrant 2, as Covey would say. So the first thing that I want you to think about is this idea of how can I improve my value proposition? Now, right now, one of the participants is laughing because that's his value proposition. We spent some time working on that, and I want to think through that with you. So my first response to the question of how can I improve my value proposition is simply to claim it, which means you have to speak it out loud and you have to begin to use it as your mantra, as your tagline. So here's a simple question for you. If you were on an airplane and the person next to you turned to you and said, well, how you doing? What do you do? And if you were able to express your value proposition powerfully, you would know it was powerful if one of two things happened. First, the person asks a good question in response. Oh, I see. So you help people buy apartment complexes. I get it. Or they might say something like, oh, so you cover several states, or you focus on only the buy side. They'll ask a good question. That's one way you can tell that your value proposition is powerful. The second way that you can tell that it's powerful is if they ask about a connection. Oh, well, then do you know Jeremy? Do you know Bo Beery? Do you know Dave? And so what that's doing is that's telling you that it's powerful because they're already beginning to file your value proposition in one of the folders in their minds. So how do you do this? Well, the easy way to do it is take out a yellow pad and just literally write down preferably single words, but if needed, phrases, and just put them on your pad and see how many you can just literally spew out onto the page, and then see if you can go back and do some editing. So as an example, you might say, based on the work that I do, that I'm an investment specialist. I work in a specific location or locale. I primarily work on deals of this size or from this perspective. I represent buyers or sellers, whatever it might be. And what you can do is see if you can wordsmith that thing down into 10 words or less. And if I had my way, it would go into your email signature, which it then begins to be part of your brand. So Bo Beery uses this one. We help investors find and buy multifamily assets. It's pretty strong. I think that's 8 or 9 words. Pretty strong, pretty clear. So what I want you to think about is that when we come back in and you begin to interact more often, can you be even more powerful, meaning more specific, more clear about how you help people? Now, some people go, Blaine, I don't want to be clear. I want to just say I'm a real estate broker and then I'll deal with it from there. Well, the problem is that's too broad. It's too much of a pond. People are going to go, oh. And then the question you might ask is, oh, well, do you know my sister-in-law in Kansas? It's like, no. And so what I want you to be thinking about is the more specific you can be, the more you can get into the niche that you serve more quickly and more powerfully. Okay, so here's a moderate answer to that response, which is, can you explain it? The first response was, can you claim it? Can you merely say what it is? The second response I have for you is what I would call explain it. And so what you could be thinking about here is that if there was an opportunity, you could have someone view a written, a narrated response as to what you do, how you serve people, what is your unique selling proposition, what makes you stand out in a crowd. And so a lot of people use a testimonial in this regard, and the most common structure for a testimonial uses the acronym CART, C-A-R-T, which stands for Challenge, Action, Result, Testimonial. And you can find these online. Rod Santabassimo and the Massimo Group uses these with all of their coaching clients. They develop these regularly. You might give it some thought. So here's how it would work. The challenge would be that Mr. Jenkins, the client, had a building that was in very poor condition, not really ready for the market, but wanted to sell it quickly. So that's the challenge. And so picture that as the first paragraph. And believe me, we're not talking about 800 words here. We're talking about 200 words, 300 words on one piece of paper. So the challenge, simply stated. The action. The owner employed Dave. Dave and his team surveyed the building, made a series of recommendations, supplemented by vendors and costs, and the owner allowed Dave to supervise the process of putting the building into market-ready condition. The result, Dave and his team were able to get the work done within 30 days, and within 30 more days procured 6 offers for the property, one of which closed 45 days later. The testimonial then is Mr. Jenkins says something like this: thanks to Dave, I was able to convert a worn out, run down, derelict property into cold hard cash in 75 days. I urge you to use Dave whenever you have the chance. So that's a standard procedure, standard process, if you will, for a testimonial. But you'd be surprised if I put all of us that are listening in a room and I said, how many of you have a ready to go off the shelf testimonial? Raise your hand. And you'd be surprised that it's not as high a percentage as you might think. There's an even easier way to get at this, which is to use the recommendation process on LinkedIn. LinkedIn for me has supplanted all other social media. I spend more time on LinkedIn. I probably go to LinkedIn 5 times a day. I like to see what my tribe is up to. In other words, the 3,200 people that I'm connected to, LinkedIn notifies me if they've had something to say. I always try to find something I can like or comment on. And so I use it as a way of staying top of mind inside my 3,200 level connections. I also drive people to LinkedIn frequently. I say, if you want to get to know me, in fact, I'll say this to you right now, if you'd like to, please link to me. What that means is you'll go to LinkedIn, you'll type my name, and you'll read a little bit about me, and then you'll click the button, said, hey, let's be connected. And then you'll be inside the tribe, and you'll benefit from the information that I share with people. But let me show you something. There is a specific process for recommendations on LinkedIn. So if you were to scroll down on my profile and click on recommendations, you would see that there are 22 recommendations there. And so you could scroll down and read my value proposition by reading what these different people have to say in 2 or 3 sentences. For the first 3 years of my coaching, I've been in the coaching space for about 10 years. For the first 3 years, I didn't even have a website. And the reason is because I drove people to LinkedIn. Here's my written value statement. Here's my education. Here's my employment history. And here are my recommendations. That's how strongly I feel about this. So again, think in your own mind, have I taken advantage of this relatively easy tool? It's so easy that what you can do is simply send a request to somebody to cause that for them to write a recommendation. It gets sent back to you. You get to approve it. If they did great, you post. If they didn't do great, you can write them back right inside the system and say, hey, could we change this word, or could you add a sentence here? So I want to encourage you to make your value proposition stronger by having other people explain it to your prospects and clients, and then it's stored permanently in this beautiful little sculpture called LinkedIn. So here's the more complex answer, which is broaden it. In other words, what I've said is, well, first, can you claim it? Can you just get 8 to 10 words together and claim it and use it as your tagline, your brand? Then I said, could you create a 1-pager in which you explain it, or you let other people explain it? Now what I'm working on is, can you show me? Can you show me? And so what I want you to think about here is a topic that I've addressed before. I explain this idea in Thrive, which is the first book that I wrote. And if you've read it, great. If you haven't read it, then you can go to my website and scroll down on webinars and watch a free webinar on why and how I think you should use a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a 100-year-old project management tool that is still absolutely in vogue today. Or let me say it differently. Every commercial real estate structure that you have ever sold or leased was developed using a Gantt chart. So architects, engineers, contractors, they're all using Gantt charts to get their work done. When we come along now and sell what they've created, what they created for $6 million, and we now sell for $8 million, we don't use a Gantt chart. And yet it's the perfect application of thinking about the process of selling the property using a Gantt chart. The perfect application is to explain to a user, these are the 43 steps we're going to go through to relocate you from this space to this space. So what you have to do is you have to list out all of the steps. Then you hire an engineer on Upwork, which is code for, I don't expect you to go to Microsoft Project or Smartsheets Bootcamp and draw these things yourself. It's too cheap to hire an expert to do it for you. What they need, though, is the instructions from you. So they will be able to respond. You'll have lots of bids. You can respond very quickly, and within a day or two, you can have a Gantt chart. Then you use it in your presentations. So this is not a true Gantt chart. I pulled it off the internet. I've spoken to Colt Power, who's an SIOR and CCIM in Texas, and said, would you mind if I used this visual demonstration? But I know it's small, but that's all you have to understand is look at the steps that are there in the green boxes and say, wow, this guy's identified 50 steps that the user has to go through to move from one location to another. And it shows not only what the steps are, but it shows the sequence and the duration of those steps. So you could see that what Colt could do is go in and speak to Mr. Jenkins and say, well, Mr. Jenkins, I would like to work with you, and I will guide you through this process of relocating. So just let me show you in one page what I do for you. I lead you through these steps. I know what they are. I know how long they last. I know when they occur. But even better, this is what I do every day. This is where I traffic. So think about how powerful the demonstration of what your value proposition is when you show it to people, when you say, this is what I'm going to do. You could, if you're feeling a little bubbly, then you could even say, look, you don't have to hire me. Even if you don't, you still have to make your way through these 50 steps. So what you would do is hire me to lead you through these 50 steps, or you can just take the sheet and try to do it yourself. Now that's a little bubbly, I understand, and you wouldn't say it that way. But that's what's going through their mind, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea how complicated, how complex it was. So claim it, express it, demonstrate it, or show it. Okay. Let's look at the second question, which is, how should I be engaging clients and prospects now? Where are we in this world of, everybody's got a different story. Every state has a different story. Every family has a different story. What do we do? Well, the easy way, of course, is to think about the use of social media. And so you can see this is your entry level response, which is to post self-crafted content on social media. What I mean by self-crafted is that you spend some time thinking about, when you go to post, what I want you to think about is the avatar, the ideal reader of this. In other words, I'm going to be speaking to Mr. Jenkins. What would I like to convey directly to Mr. Jenkins? Self-crafted means that you either think about those things yourself and find a way to demonstrate those things, or you find someone else who has said something that you believe is powerful and say, I found this to be really useful, especially where he discusses, especially when she shows us how to. And so what happens is people who read that are going to be interested in linking and connecting and seeing what that is, and you're going to get credit in that process. But you see the first bullet here, are you linked to your clients? What I would tell you is that as I wander around and I see a lot of people putting effort into social media, what I discover is many times that they will say, yes, my ideal client, the person I really want to read this is Mr. Jenkins. If you've read Thrive as an example, you know I talk about having a list of your top 125 clients. And let's just imagine that you had that list today, and then you said to me, hey, could you take a look at this potential post? I would like to maybe put this in LinkedIn or use my social media. I'd say, great. It looks good. Why are you doing this? Well, I want to convey it directly to Mr. Jenkins. Well, here's the deal, gang. I would say that for the typical broker, about 25% of their top 125 are actually linked to them. In other words, maybe your single greatest task would be to bounce back through your top prospect list and make sure that they're linked to social media. What I see many, many times is brokers effectively educating other brokers. In other words, here's a great story, here's a great study, and they get kind of, it's kind of fun because, people type comments and they give you smiles and they give you thumbs up. And you're like, oh, I love this stuff. This is very affirming. I love this. Yeah, but it's not effective. So what I want to make sure of is that you are linked to the people you're trying to communicate. Now, there are people that are not on LinkedIn, and you may have to say, I've got to deal with those people in a different way. You may want to call them directly. You may want to text them. You may want to deal with them in another way. But what I just want you to make sure of is that your social media actually gets traction. One of the most powerful things you can do is, if you've got that set up and you're ready to get traction, then one of the most powerful things you can do is ask a question or create a survey or offer to send something. You know, the standard social media idea is that you're looking for not just eyeballs, how many people saw it, but what was the engagement level. And engagement level flows from them taking an action. So if you ask a question and they respond, then you know that you struck a vein. If you post something and they comment on it, or they ask you to send you the full report, then that's really valuable. Now, you know that there are people out there who have totally bought into the Gary Vaynerchuk jab, 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 punch. That's the name of his book. I personally do not buy that philosophy. Some people do. What I personally am doing, and when you link to me, you can go and see my posts, and I try to restrain myself to posting once a week. You can decide on what you think works best for you. But in the end, the simple question is where is the greatest traction? Okay, let's talk about a little more invasive idea, which means you got to pick up a phone call. And what I would tell you is that the top brokers that I work with are telling me that they are having better conversations than they've ever had. In other words, when they're calling people, those people are more relaxed, have more time to talk, want to talk than they've ever had in the past. And so you should be asking yourself if you're having those kinds of questions. Now, here's the deal. What those top brokers are not doing is saying, hey, you know, you're not collecting as much rent. The cap rates are going, the cap rates are going up. I think you should sell. You know, do you want to sell? Which works. You know, we can churn, or some firms choose to churn when the market is really moving full speed, but it's not that. So the questions you want to ask is, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing? What's happening? What are you finding? And you'll be surprised that if you give them simple, open-ended questions, that they'll begin to engage with you. And so one of the things that I would tell you is that you better be ready with some ideas about some topics that you want to talk about, but also record that information. You're going to learn more about their families, more about their businesses, more about their approach, more about their strategy, their thesis than ever before. And so you should be taking those notes and getting that into your CRM, because when you call them next time and say, hey, Janet, it's been 90 days since we talked. I really enjoyed our last conversation. You made an interesting comment, and I've made a note to myself to follow up on it. So how's Valencia Gardens going? Or what happened to your daughter who graduated and went from, you know, on track to graduate and take the job in New York City to online graduation and now not? And so it gives you that perfect opportunity to reconnect. If you have a great conversation, you want to use that as a stepping stone in your next conversation. My theory for you is that you should call until you have 10 of those conversations and just ask yourself, what have you learned? And what you're going to find is you're learning things that you haven't learned before, and possibly very valuable anecdotes, which then circle back into you being able to share. You've heard me do that on this conversation. In this webinar, I have now shared 2 or 3 things that this is what's happening out there. And that ability to give perspective and anecdotes, illustrations, is very valuable. And so when you talk to one person and learn something, sometimes it creates a connection to be able to share it with someone else. You know, that's interesting. I'm finding that many people are not collecting all the rent that they thought they were going to collect, but for the most part, that hasn't changed their investment strategy. What an opener. What are you thinking? Okay, and then if you really wanted to think about it, you can see this strategy also in motion right now, which is that I created this lunch and learn type of idea, and I'm trying to share it with various people. And so there is an opportunity for you to create full engagement by trying to create some kind of online learning session. Now, you know, nobody really wants to hear any more about COVID or how that's going to work. So you may have to think about things a little bit differently. But as an example, I had a client that works in Silicon Valley, industrial specialist, and he began to create these lunch and learns. And what he began to think about was, here's something I've wanted to investigate. Why are the ceiling heights going up? What is happening there? Are we moving from per square foot rent to cubic yard rent, thinking of it in that way. And so he created a kind of a little learning scenario, and it got great traction, and people were very interested. I think there were only 20 people on the webinar, but it worked fantastic in terms of creating things. Here's another idea for you. There is absolutely no question that we are going to be dealing with more lenders in the next year than we've dealt with in the last 8 years, because what's happening is that some of these properties will simply enter into some kind of structured situation with the lender. So here's a great opportunity for you to be talking to the lenders in your world and saying, hey, what if we had a little lunch and learn, and you can get your 4 or 5, your analyst, your co-lender, your boss, whomever it is, let's have a little discussion about what's going on in the marketplace. Believe me, those people are seeking content to engage their own staff, number one, and then it gives you an opportunity to meet their team, to have some discussions. It doesn't have to be long, but you can say, this is where we are, and I think these are the signs that I'm looking for. I promise you that the lenders are a hungry audience. You can also do book studies. Many people you'll see lots of posts now from people agreeing to do some kind of book, and you may find that there's a group of clients that would be interested in that. I've seen online collaboration sessions. Let's make a list together of 15 things that we want to do when we reopen our properties. So you create an online brainstorming session, and that can be recorded. You can call clients to that. You can assemble special guests for that. It's a great way to create engagement and therefore drive up traction. It really has a lot to do with your value proposition. They think of you now in a whole new way. Okay, we're doing great, gang. This is the third question. We're coming to we're gonna work our way through this last question, then we'll have time for comments or questions. How can I increase my market penetration when the market returns? So when the market comes back, and there's going to be some number of transactions that are out there, how can you get your share or more? So the first thing that I would tell you, the simple answer is to scour your database. Now, right there when I said that, a third of you are going, my database is terrible. I would tell you that as I wander the planet and talk to top brokers, about the best, the average I would say is sort of B-. There are a few that are on this call that have exceptional databases because they comb it and comb it and comb it. So my question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, what would you give your database? Which is kind of like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how's it going on garage storage in your house? How's it going on your master bedroom closet? How's that going for you? So it's the same kind of thing, which is that you use it every day, and here's an opportunity for you to make it better. Here's a way you can determine whether you're making it better. The level 1 changes would be, get the duplicates out, and oh my gosh, that guy left that company 14 years ago. He's had 3 jobs since then. So it's like, okay, clearly you have to update and make it better. My next question to you is, could you find 3 new conclusions? By wandering around in your database, could you say, wow, I never realized that I have 5 clients in Los Angeles. Maybe if I can ever travel again, I'm going to set up a little road trip and I'm going to go see all 5 of them in one day. Or maybe you're more on the property side and you begin to do just interesting searches like, well, exactly how many buildings are there in this zip code? How many buildings are in this area? What is the vacancy rate on the north side of the street compared to the south side of the street? Well, I wonder what that means. And so what I'm telling you is the seedlings for you improving your market penetration, assuming that your database is functional. Now, if it's not, you got to decide how you feel about that. And frankly, a non-functional database is no man's land. You should either get out of it or get in it. But limping along with a non-functional database is a waste of time. So let's assume that it's working for you. And so what I'm saying is the seedlings to greater market penetration is to scour the data that you already have. If you want to take it one step further, you may be able to incorporate what's called a user-defined field. What that means is that you get to label the field and then shape the answer. So as an example, let's just say that you wanted to ask every person in your database, are you a Democrat or Republican? So it would say political affiliation would be the label, and then you'd have a drop-down box, and you could only select, you know, Democrat, Republican, or other. So you're not typing, you're not making a mistake when you go to sort. That would be a user-defined field. Now, that may not be, political persuasion may not be particularly powerful for the way that you work, but how about questions that go something like this? Maybe it is open to new opportunities, looking to expand, willing to invest with me on my own deals. University of blank alumni. So I'm in Orlando. I'm 100 miles away from the University of Florida. I'm sort of still inside the realm of bull gator country. And there's something about these gators that if you invoke the gatorhood early in the conversation, it just goes better. But that might also help you think that, you know, someday what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a box at a university game, and I'm going to invite these people, and they're going to come, and I'm going to be convening them in a way that they've never been convened before. But you can only do that if you begin to track that. I have one client, and the question is wine, and the answer is red or white. And the reason for that is because he enjoys wine. He loves bringing it up. He goes, hey, Bill, you know, I've been thinking that I'm going to make a little more effort this year at holiday time to give out gifts. And I'm a big wine guy. I really enjoy selecting it. And if I were to give you a gift of wine, do you think you'd choose red or white? So what happens is when they answer that question, then maybe you get an opportunity to go, well, would you ever be interested in going to having a wine tasting? If I could get a little commercial real estate roundtable together and we kind of worked at it for a couple hours and then broke into a tasting, would that be interesting? So it may be red or white, and then tasting yes or no. Those are user-defined fields. And if you begin to think about that, then what happens is as you're interacting with these prospects, you can include that idea, and it leads them into an area where they're comfortable, that they want to interact with you in that regard. So in Thrive, Chapter 1, again, you do not need to buy or read that book. You can go to the HBS webinar, website. There's a free 45-minute video that explains the idea of how you build a top 125 program. I personally think that you should know who your top 125 prospects are. They get on that list because you believe that over the next 5 years, they will give birth at least once to a deal that you want to do. So what you're doing is pre-predicting who's going to make a deal over the next 5 years. Or to say it differently, what that is the first step in proving out the 80-20 theory that you will harvest over the next 5 years. So one of the things that you could do is say, well, how good is my top 125? Do I have a list of 125? If you don't have 125, then you could start with 25 and then slowly build it up. But what happens is when you make that call, when you interact with someone, even someone that you don't know but you're going to meet in the next week, it would go through your brain like, I wonder if this is a candidate for my top 125 list. I wonder if I should keep closer track of this person. And in the 125 webinar, in the chapter, what I explain is when you figure out who those people are, you treat them differently, meaning that you make it your business to have a high quality touch 4 times per year. And so if you want to increase your market penetration, think of it this way. What if this really works? There are people on this call now that would raise their hand and say that it does work. And so because they've been using it. And so think of it this way. What if I told you, hey, Catherine, on this list, there are 125 people. It's probably going to work in that 5 years from now when I say, how did it go? Let's say that 100 of them actually do a deal over the next 5 years that you would want to do, but 25 of them don't. But that's offset by the number of people that also did 2, 3, 4 deals. So here's the deal. In that corral right there, 125 deals are going to go down on your watch in your territory. What will your capture rate be? So gang, if you want to increase your market penetration, then aim, figure out with all of your experience, who's going to make these deals, and then make it your business to capture the business that you know is going to be there. Okay, and then finally, the last thought I have for you is this is where we're headed. And the idea is, if I said to you, what I want you to do is I want you to predict the next 50 transactions that are going to occur that you want to do that are inside your niche. So whatever you do, sell multifamily, sell self-storage, work on senior housing, move all the tenants from one side of the street to the other side of the street in a suburban office location, sell shopping centers, whatever it might be. If I asked you to predict the next 50 transactions and said, look, I really mean it, I want you to try. And you'd say, okay, well, let me think about that for a while. And there's 2 ways you could do it. One way that you would do it is you would look at the last, let's say 300 sales, and you would collect 20 data points on those 300 properties. And it might be how old the center is, what type of entity owns it, what kind of tenants are in the center, where is it located, has there been a capital improvement, what is the nature of the debt that's on the property, There could be any number of data points that you might collect. And then what you would do is you would look to see if those data points could somehow be grouped together so that they became predictive. In other words, you would say, Blaine, a property is likely to sell if the following conditions exist. Number one, it's multi-tenant. Number two, it's had a capital improvement of at least 10% of its value in the last 2 years. Number three, it's owned by a domestic entity that has multiple partners. And number four, it has high quality tenants. It has high credit tenants. And you go, okay. So what happens is that's the use of multiple regression analysis, which produces an algorithm, and it ends up giving you a score on the likelihood that something will happen. You've already been exposed to multiple algorithms today. Anybody who bought Amazon sees something pop up next to it. And what Amazon is saying is, since you are interested in buying this product, it's highly likely that you're also going to be this one, that you're going to buy this one. Well, how would they know that? Well, that's because they've got thousands, billions of data points, and they've realized 70% of the people who buy this also consider this. I heard an interesting story about Amazon Prime Now. Where I live in Orlando, we are in an Amazon Prime Now scenario, which means that you can click on things and have them delivered within 2 hours. And you're like, wow, how do they do that? How do they cover, I thought it was about the last mile. Now it's like the last half mile. How do they get here within 2 hours? And what they've discovered is that people in this zip code based on credit card transactions are highly likely to buy contact solution, copy paper, batteries, and almond milk. And that's what they store. That's what they create in these stores that are nearby. That's an algorithm working. Don't say the number out loud. You spend a lot of hours on Netflix. Every time you go on Netflix, it says, we think you'd also like. That's an algorithm. Let's look at method number two. You say, well, I don't really know, Blaine. I don't really know about algorithms. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to build a scorecard for each property in my marketplace. And I just ask myself, what is the likelihood that that property is going to sell? And I give a score for the strength of the marketplace. Is the marketplace in transition? How many years has it been since it's sold? How much vacancy is there? What is the redevelopment potential? And so you would build a score used on your experience, and you would say, I scored 200 properties, and so therefore, what I think is the likelihood of them to sell, and therefore I'm going to choose these 50 as my top candidates. I got this idea from talking to an admissions counselor not too long ago, and he was telling me that when students apply to get into his college, they build a score. And what that means is you get so many points for SAT, you get so many points for advanced placement classes, you get so many points for varsity sports, and you get so many points for legacy, which is code for, did your parents come here? And so what they do is they create this score. And I said, well, what is the point of that score? And he said, Blaine, we have to have people matriculate. We can only survive as a university if the people that we let in matriculate, because if they bail out, we have a hard time filling that slot after they're gone. And frankly, if you try to get into University A but don't and go to University B, there's some possibility you'll transfer, but more than likely you're going to be happy at B and you stay at B. So we really got to pick people at the front end that are going to matriculate. That's our whole game. We do that by building a scorecard, which means that they begin to influence how important is SAT, how important is AP class, how important is mommy's money. And they figure that out. Now, I would say to you, now's the time to think about that. You could do that. Okay, so there are the two books. Jeremy, I don't know if I did it in 30 minutes, but I rushed through the points that I wanted to make. Those are the books that have been referenced. You can buy them with a discount at either Amazon or at my website if that's interesting to you. So Jeremy, we can leave the screen on if you'd like, but I was going to turn it back to you and see if you have questions or comments.
Well, no, I appreciate it, Blaine. So we, as you know, we don't have a chat box. So it means we're going to have an opportunity for our attendees to use their mics and ask questions. So Dave, question for you. Do you need to release the miking? There's a mic restriction we have on here, I believe. We
Yep,
can.
I just did that. So participants have the ability to unmute. Certainly, if you want to unmute, ask a question, and we'll try to get it answered, and then mute yourself again, and we'll kind of go through some question and answer if you have it.
Okay, great. So if you have a question for Blaine, you can unmute yourself and just go ahead and speak up. Okay. Well, Blaine, while we're waiting, I do want to bring up, I noticed that you had the Red Sox, the Celtics, and the Bruins represented on your slides.
Yeah, that was my attempt to do a little customization. If you go back to the early slides also, Jeremy, you'll see that there's a Boston skyline and a picture of the marathon trophy, marathon statue. So I miss my sports, you know, no baseball, no basketball. I don't know what to do with myself these days. What I do is I spend time to figure out how to do virtual aquariums.
Virtual. So I guess the question, I guess you didn't put, you probably could have put the Buccaneers up there for Brady coming down to Florida. I don't know if everyone knows, but Blaine is out of Orlando. So you have Gronkowski and Brady now in Florida, which maybe that's why you left the Patriots off the slides.
Well, the fun story out of Tampa is that Brady and Gronkowski went to a local park in Tampa to just throw the ball around, and other people started joining in. And the next thing you know, the cops had to come over and break it up for social distancing. So welcome to Tampa Bay, Tom. Everybody's muted here. There we go. All right, Jeremy, I think you're still muted.
I must have hit mute on myself by accident. So you brought up points that we can use to take advantage of this time, this transition in the market. I think, you know, one of the things I'm curious about is you talk to people all over the country in this business, and you have the unique vantage point of gathering information and pulling that together to develop insights. So looking out over the next 12, 24, 36 months, what's the feeling right now that you're getting for the duration of this interruption in the market?
Well, everybody has a different answer to that. I can tell you that where I am in Central Florida, as an example, it hasn't really been it really hasn't been a ventilator or bed crisis, if you will, in the sense that we've been able to manage the flow of the disease. So they're starting to talk about reopening. The reopening is jagged, and you know, it's troublesome. As an example, think about Disney World, where there are 65,000 people a day that go to work there. And so under what conditions will they all come back to work, and how does that work? So there's a lot of uncertainty in that regard. I would tell you that what I'm getting from my coaching clients is that, first of all, the sellers have not moved yet. In other words, yeah, I collected 90% of the rent that I thought I would in April. A couple people have told me they actually collected more in May. Maybe that's because the PPP loan went to the tenant who paid his people, who then paid rent. So the sellers are not entertaining the, hey, I think the rent collections are down and the cap rates are gone up, so my property's in trouble and therefore I'm willing to sell. I don't think that's the mode. I think they're saying, look, it was a blip. You'll never have to suffer that blip. I suffered it, but we're not going to talk about a reduction in the net operating income. We're going to talk about it as $200,000 that was sort of like a capital improvement in the past. So I think that there's been so far resistance by the sellers to sort of panic, if you will. I think many of the brokers that I interact with remind me that, hey, when we got in this business, number one, we knew it was risky. I never thought that we would need less than 6 to 12 months of operating expenses to hang in there, just because it's a risky business, not because of terrorism or recession or pandemic, just it's a risky business. Number two, we've been long overdue. So anybody who hasn't saved money over the last few years, while they've been having great years, has fooled themselves. So what I'm trying to say there, Jeremy, is that I don't know exactly what how it's going to turn out, but what I can tell you is a lot of brokers are girding themselves or have girded themselves to hang in there, to be there over a long run. Now, in terms of what's going to come back first and how that's working, I don't know. I've heard a lot of interesting things. I reviewed a document for a client this morning in which they were going over elevator procedures, which means now when you get on the elevator, there's going to be dots on the floor and you have to stand on those dots, and the elevator capacity will be reset so that it's only 1,000 pounds, not 3,500 pounds. meaning that they're going to try to enforce, less people being in the elevator. How's that going to work? What is that going to do to business? I don't know. Fortunately, because I'm so stinking old, I've been through a lot of these cycles, and in every single time, the people who endure are able to innovate and create and come back even stronger. So the fact that we have some folks on this webinar listening to that and started thinking about that, I think are already doing the right things. Final thought about opportunities, I don't know. Here's an interesting idea that was presented to me the other day. So let's say they're saying in Florida, we're going to lose about 30% of our restaurants. They just won't reopen. That's a lot of kitchens. And at the same time, we have children that are hungry. We have this mismanagement of, that's not the right word. The distribution channels that are set up for food are oriented in certain ways. And we're going to have to reorient the distribution of the food. But as an example, what if an apartment complex bought a restaurant because they could now improve their value proposition by making meals available to the people who live there? So yes, the rent is $1,800 a month, but it includes breakfast because we own this restaurant now, or we can do something that we've never done before. So I think there's great opportunity here. I don't know what the answer is. We just got to hang in there as part of the answer.
Those are some great thoughts. Anyone want to jump in and ask Blaine a question?
Disney. Hey, Jeremy.
Okay, Ernie, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah, Disney is opening one of its parks, I guess, this week or today over in the Orient, maybe Shanghai. And with 15 or 20% of the tickets being allowed to be sold that they have been in that park. Now, Disney has been very profitable by cramming tons of people into their parks. They won't be able to do that anymore. Using that as an example of probably all businesses, I think all business may have to be reset as to the income coming in, which may relate back to rents to pay and so on. So, and then the cap on properties and, the whole thing trickling down through, everything. So that's my thought.
Well, I'd give you maybe two quick reactions to that. Number one, Disney is losing a lot of money, but part of what the reopening does for them is create opportunities for them to do things that they have never done before. So as an example, on the day they closed, which was in mid-March, they said, well, we've been closed 4.5 days total in 52 years, 1 day each for 4 hurricanes and a half day for 9/11. Now they've been closed. It's coming up on 2 months now. And so in the beginning, it was just shock. We've got to kind of retrench a little bit. But because anybody who lives in Orlando knows Disney people. And so I had a Disney guy make this comment to me not too long ago, which was, we don't know what to do about the Grand Floridian Hotel. If you've been to Disney, you know that there's 3 hotels, the Contemporary, the Polynesian Village, and the Grand Floridian that are on the tram, and it's on the monorail, and it's incredibly valuable to stay there. But because they get $600 a night, and because it's 97% occupied at all times, they've never had the ability to take it offline and fix it. And they knew that when they did fix it, let's say it costs $500 million to upgrade it. It's 40 years old. It costs $500 million to upgrade it. And after they do that, guess what? They get $600 a night and they're 97% occupied. So the ROI has been troublesome as well as the ability to do it. Now, to have the hotel vacant for 3 months or 2 months, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for them to do things that they would never otherwise be able to do. So I secretly feel, this is totally my own opinions, is that Disney has embraced what's happened and will come back stronger. The second thing I would say to you is, so what would be your personal standard for going to Disney World? In other words, under what conditions would you go to Disney World? And I think you're going to see more and more people say that this is going to come down to personal choice. But for me, for my family, it would be, I would only go if I had the vaccine. Well, we're in a countdown to the vaccine. I don't know when I'm going to get the vaccine. Just like all of us on this call, sooner or later, we're going to get it. Because we're going to want to, even if we isolate, we're still going to want to be, why wouldn't we have additional protection just when we go to Publix or whatever the grocery store that you go to is? So we're in a countdown to the vaccine. And so that means that, not to mention that we're going to be so much smarter about logistics, distribution. We will never have a ventilator shortage again, I promise you. The state of Florida, as an example, had 40-year-old computers trying to handle its unemployment system. That problem will be solved now. So again, I think if you can hang in there, we're going to make it to the far side, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see how some things are much, much better than they were.
Thank you, Ernie, for that question. Another question?
Oh,
Hey, it's Bo Berry. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bo.
Hey, man. How are you, Blaine?
Welcome aboard. Glad to have you.
You're looking good there. I like that background.
I just learned how to do that.
Yeah. You probably can't answer this, but it's just, I'm more so asking it because I think a lot of folks in the investment sale business are thinking it, which is I'm kind of waiting for when is the period in time at which the resident in an apartment complex feels comfortable with one or two vendors coming in to do inspections in the due diligence period of a buyer, right? To me, that's one of the keys that it's hard to go to contract between a buyer and seller when no one knows when that can be completed, right? And so if you're spending $15 million in an apartment complex and you're borrowing 70%, you got a lot of people's neck on the lines that are not going to just buy it by doing a virtual walkthrough or whatever, right? And so you've got the lender, you got the phase one guy, you got the due diligence third party that people hire, you got the surveyor. And so to me, I think it all boils down to what's going to happen. What does the world have to look like where, you know, the married couple with one child, 2-2 or a 3-2 apartment in Orlando, Jacksonville, Daytona, whatever, feels comfortable with even just one person coming in with a mask and gloves, and they're legit. And there's you know, the note is posted on the door by the property manager that says, hey, inspector's coming through. This is what he's going to wear. He's not going to touch. When can that happen? That's what I'm waiting for. I think that's the key to start transacting again.
Yeah, I mean, even you and I have talked about this, Bo, which is, you know, all deals fell into one of three categories. The deal either, at the beginning of this, the deal either made because the momentum was so strong, or the deal died because there was so much confusion and, you know, lenders were bailing and people didn't know. But there's some deals that have also sort of pushed, which is we still want to do the deal. We just can't get these details together. But just as you were talking, I was thinking about, so if you had a 200 unit apartment complex and 10% of the units turn over per month, so that's 20 units. And so a seller could say to a buyer, look, we're going to take those 20 units and take them off the market for a month. We're going to put them in the new condition that we normally put them on. There is nobody living there. And so 40 days from now, you'll be able to see what the renovated units look like, and you can enter these 20 units. Now that is 10% of the units sufficient for you for your introduction, for your inspection? Don't know. We also offered a $500 bonus to the first 10 families that were renewing but staying. And so they've agreed to vacate their premises for half a day. You can make your inspections and we'll clean that up. We'll figure it out. So I think you're going to see some innovation in the way that some people might be able to do that. And some people could make that decision and, you know, $500 off, which feels like a lot of money. 10 units times $500 is $5,000. But if you're trying to sell a 200 unit apartment complex and it moves it up a month, that might be valuable. The families would certainly take a $500 discount as an example. So there may be sort of innovative solutions like that. But we're all going to be subjected to very, very soon interacting with people. And so if someone shows up at your door, they're going to, did you see, I was watching the news last night and there's an airport in, I think it's in Austria or Switzerland, where as soon as you get off the airplane, you are tested. You have this instantaneous test, and you are then given a COVID passport, which means you do not have the virus at this moment. So the airline is delivering these people to this airport, and they're getting off and getting tested, and they go into one of two lines. Either these people are free to travel, or these people have to be quarantined. And so I think we're all going to find sort of conventional structure for those kind of questions, as well as maybe innovative conditions like what if an apartment owner held 20 units off the market for 45 days just for that purpose. Not a typical answer, would typically not do that, would want to rush it back to market, of course. But less people are moving around right now, and it might be an opportunity to take the market off the unit for 45 days. So hope that helps.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to get innovative. You're right.
Okay, I think we've got time for probably one more question. Anyone else want to step up and ask that last question while we have Blaine?
Hi, Blaine, it's Karen, and hi, Jeremy. How are you today?
Hi.
It's Karen
Hi, Karen.
Hurd. Blaine, thank you so much. You know, I listened to a recent webinar. Casey Conway's been talking a lot about adaptive reuse, so I'll definitely have to pick up your book, Adapt. It seems timely. You know, a lot of the question that I have is about, I don't know, half of the states or so have begun to reopen their economies. And, you know, when I think about all the concerns from the health experts, are some premature, you know, as we look at, you know, where major markets are, where construction's in place or not, you know, what other things are you hearing across the country, you know, in addition to, like, you know, converting a portion of an apartment building to a restaurant? Any other thoughts on adaptive reuse for properties?
Well, I think that there's 2 or 3 quick reactions I have to that, Karen. Thank you for that question. My first reaction to it is, so the governor of Florida has said that restaurants can reopen. They can use 25% of their internal capacity, and if they have any external capacity like patios, they can use 100% of it as long as social distancing remains. And so, you know, Karen, if you and I owned a restaurant and we reported after a year, like, yeah, our restaurant ran at about 25% capacity, we would have already been closed for several months. Restaurants don't have the margin to operate at 25% capacity. So that isn't going to be a very happy solution for very long. I think a second issue that many of us are thinking about, there was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal about, was it Wall Street Journal? I think it was New York Times, actually. And what it was talking about is, why did Florida not suffer? Was it lucky? Was it smart? Why did it not suffer? And I think what happened is because there's an older population here, and I'm unfortunately edging into that population. I feel healthy. I ran this morning, but I'm at an age where I don't really want to tangle with it. And so a lot of us are making self-isolation decisions that are not complete quarantine, et cetera, but we're empty nesters. I'm empty nester. I work out of my house. I have a lot of teleconferencing and things like this. So I'm simply making the decision to stay away. My church hasn't convened in 9 weeks. They came out the other day and said it's going to be at least 4 more weeks, even though the governor allows us to open. And so, as an example, I think there's going to be this continued sort of self-decision-making process. What I think is going to be really interesting to watch is when we get to the point of it's not going to be as focused on temperature and gloves and PPE. It's going to be more focused on, look, we've done all these things, but if you cross this line, you are taking risk at your own accord. You recognize that there's risk. We cannot protect you against everything. So please come in and enjoy yourself. But if you do, you have to understand that if you somehow later get it, you can't sue us. The articles that are out there right now are just talking about safe conditions between employers and employees, but employers or restaurants, whatever, are going to have to start to think about what is the contract they have with the customer now. So right now, a lot of the discussions are about, you know, force majeure. Do I really have to pay rent? And okay, I'll pay rent since the government is giving me the money. But I think we're going to get down into a true sort of almost Tea Party independence, where you're going to have to make your own decision about whether you're going to take a risk. And if you do, and you become sick, and you go, well, I'm going to sue you because you didn't protect me in some way that I thought was appropriate. Well, hopefully you recover and live long enough to see that lawsuit through. I don't mean to be harsh or flippant. I'm just simply saying that we're going to have to decide to take some of those risks on our own. In terms of what's going to happen to the real estate, you know, people have said for years, as an example in Florida, that we've been over retailed for a long, long time. We've always operated with too much retail. And so you'll look around and you'll see that in other cities, retail has been converted into housing. Somebody said maybe 2 years ago that the number one growth tenant in retail, the number one growth tenant in the retail arena in Florida was churches. And so it makes me wonder whether we'll ever see the construction of a church building again. I mean, why would you, when you could convert the vacated retail property that has all the parking that you need, maybe plus the kitchen, plus the sanitation, plus the signage. So all I can tell you, Karen, is we've seen a lot of this kind of thinking before. What I really think is happening here is that it's not so much that this is new, it's just at hyper speed. In other words, we've had to make these innovations in the past. There's no difference between the creative destruction that occurred before and that will happen now. It's just that it's going to be sped up. It's just going to happen quicker.
Thank
That's
you, Blaine.
awesome. Thank you. Well, Dave, if you're there, we can go ahead and wrap up. Blaine, I really appreciate your joining us today. This was great, very insightful, and we had great participation. Appreciate everyone for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. It was great to be with you guys. I wish you well, and one of these days we'll all reconvene.
We will. We will. Thank you.
Great. Blaine, Jeremy, thank you very much. Blaine, I think it's also important for the folks that are still on. You've done a great job here in offering a discount as well for anyone who's interested in Thrive or Adapt. You've got the information on the screen, Amazon or your HBS Resources website with the promo code ADAPT2020 for a 20% discount on those books. So, a little extra for those who have participated. And as you said at the beginning, we're going to try to get this video and the information circulated so others can take advantage of it. But we ran a little bit long. We didn't have our chat function, so a couple little glitches. But listen, all in all, great information, great tools, great ideas and resources on how to move forward during all this. So from the New England chapter, thank you, Blaine, and thank you everyone who's participated and been watching. And we look forward to getting through this together and getting out on the other end. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, great. Thanks.